evening with me. Before I jump into the presentation, I'm just going to talk a little bit about an overview of what I'll be speaking about. We'll start with the background of manatees. We'll go into their migration patterns, talk about threats and mortality causes. I'll talk about Chessie the manatee, who I'm sure you all have heard about. And then I'll talk about research that we do at CMARI, or Clearwater Marine Aquarium Research Institute, and we call it CMARI for short. It kind of sounds like calamari. So the Florida manatee is a marine mammal. It's a subspecies of the West Indian manatee, which is scientifically called Trichechus manatus. It's classified as a threatened species. It used to be endangered, but they recently downlisted it as the population increased. If you've never seen a manatee, it looks like a really big potato if you think about it non-scientifically. They're typically 9 to 10 feet long, although this can vary, and they weigh between 800 to 2,200 pounds. And again, that can vary as well. And they lack a thick blubber layer, like when you think about other marine mammals, such as dolphins or whales. So they're really susceptible to cold water. These are some photos of manatees. We can see on the right, they have a special diaphragm. They have a 2 hemidiaphragm, which means that their lungs are in a separate cavity from the rest of their organs. And this really helps control their buoyancy. Something else that I want to talk about is their fluke tails. Typically, manatees are known as slow swimming creatures. They can swim between 3 to 5 miles per hour on average, but they can kick it up to 20 miles per hour. So their fluke allows them to do that. Manatees live in freshwater and saltwater, as well as a mix. They can be seen as far east as Texas, which we can see in that blue, and as far north as Massachusetts. And then the orange is another subspecies of the West Indian manatee called the Antillean manatee, and their latitude is a little bit lower in range. Manatees are herbivores, so unlike other marine mammals, they only consume vegetation. They can consume between 10 to 15% of their body weight per day. And so if you do the math, this is upwards of 100 pounds of vegetation per day. These are some examples of vegetation that they like. It can range from seagrasses to pickler weed, spartina, wild rice, hydrilla. And again, these are just a few examples of a lot of the vegetation that they have available to them. One of the most common questions that I get asked is, what is the main importance of manatees? Well, there are a few of them. One of them is that they're a sentinel species, which means that they're a really good indicator of the health of the ecosystem. When manatees are happy and healthy, usually the ecosystem is as well. They're also a keystone species, so there's few numbers of them, but they have a really high impact on the environment. Since manatees are herbivores, they are also really good at vegetation control and making sure that seagrasses aren't overgrown, and they can provide really good nursery and habitat for other smaller species. Manatees are sometimes also referred to as fertilizers of the sea, so they're really good at nutrient cycling within the ecosystem. And then finally, we have the human aspect importance of they're really important for ecotourism down in Florida, as well as other areas where manatees live. So earlier I mentioned that manatees do not have that thick blubber layer. So this means that they can't tolerate temperatures that are below 68 degrees Fahrenheit or about 20 degrees Celsius for long periods of time. So this is the entire winter season. So we see a lot of manatees start to move down to Florida, and they're in search of warmer water. And this can be in the form of natural waters or artificial waters. And on the left here, we have the natural. So this is at Blue Springs State Park. And on the right, this is an example of artificial warm water. This is a power plant down in Riviera Beach down in Florida. And we can see all the manatees congregating in these areas. There can be upwards of hundreds to thousands of manatees in one site. When these manatees don't make their way down to the warm water, they can experience something called cold stress, which can eventually cause mortality. And this is considered a natural cause for manatees, a natural cause of death for manatees. Now, this is a little bit more depressing to talk about, but I do just want to mention it because they are threatened species, so it's important to see what's causing their deaths. Other causes for manatee mortalities is structures, so canal locks and gates, they can be crushed in these. Watercraft is a big one, causing collisions and injuries through that. Other human-caused reasons can be things like entanglement. And then we have perinatal deaths. So this is deaths that occur in calves that are less than 150 centimeters, which is about 5 feet long. Then sometimes we have undetermined reasons for manatee mortalities. This can be due to necropsies that are performed, which is like an autopsy for an animal, to necropsies that are performed, but the results are inconclusive, or we can see that their bodies are too decomposed and we can't actually perform a necropsy on them. And this is a pie chart showing manatee deaths in Florida from last year in 2024, organized by cause. We can see a lot of them are actually not necropsied. The second most common is caused by perinatal, so those calf-related deaths that are natural. And watercraft collisions result in 100 deaths, followed by other natural issues, human-related issues with canal locks, more cold stress, and then other human issues as well. And more on the bright side, we do see manatees that are rescued. We have a lot of means to do that in different organizations down here in Florida that can rescue manatees and also do so out of state. But specifically in Florida, a lot of rescues were due to natural causes. So again, that's cold stress. That could also be things like toxins as well as infectious diseases. We saw a lot of calves by himself that were rescued, watercraft again being a big one, entanglement and entrapment. And speaking of rescues, this kind of segues into talking about Chessie the manatee, which I'm sure you all have heard about. So Chessie was a male manatee that was first seen in 1994. He was up in the Chesapeake Bay, and how I mentioned, manatees need that warm water. So it was kind of later in the winter season, and Chessie was still way far up north. So officials made the decision to rescue him, and he ended up in the National Aquarium in Baltimore for a few days, I believe. And then he was sent down via US Coast Guard, so by airborne, he came down to Florida. Once he was deemed releasable, he was released in 1995 and monitored with a tracker by USGS for about a year. We can see his movements here on the map of the US. He started down in January down in Florida where the warm water was, and he made his way up north. And he was the first example that we saw a manatee going past the Chesapeake Bay. He ended up in Judith Point in Rhode Island, and later that year he went back down south for winter successfully, but he ended up losing his tracker. He was spotted once after he lost his tracker, he was spotted in 2001 and then in 2011. And so we can see that Chessie wasn't spotted for a span of 5 years and then 10 years. And then in 2011, he was finally spotted in 2021, back down in Florida. And there's concerns about his buoyancy due to a UME that occurred. And a UME stands for an unusual mortality event. And this occurs when a species experiences a high spike in deaths, and it can usually be pinpointed to a certain issue, and it requires a response from organizations such as FWC or NOAA. In this particular case with Chessie, we saw starvation of manatees due to seagrass loss in the Indian River Lagoon, which is a warm water site, and this affected manatees all along Florida's east coast. This is a picture of an example of a manatee. This is not Chessie, but this is a manatee that had died due to starvation. We see a really flat body and a peanut-shaped head and a sunken head. So this is a manatee that unfortunately starved to death. The UME resulted in a little over 1,200 manatee deaths and in 137 rescues, one of those being Chessie. We can compare these numbers to that pie chart that I showed you of 2024 deaths. That was only 565 deaths total that whole year. During this UME event, we were seeing manatee deaths about the same numbers just within the span of 3 months or so in that winter time. So we can see the devastating results on this population from the UME. Luckily, Chessie was one that did survive. So once he was released, he was monitored by our organization, CMARI. And we can see from this map, he ended up not moving as far north as we thought he would. He ended up just staying in Florida. And if this video plays, I just want to show
right where the belt
how we tag and track manatees.
Okay, so they're measuring the peduncle, which is right at the base of the tail.
I'm not sure if you can hear it, but the important part is looking at it visually. So that video was from Chessie's release in 2021. It showed a little bit of how we put on their tracking gear, but I want to just show it in a little bit more detail. So first we have the belt, and this fits around their peduncle. And then we have a tether, which connects their tag and belt. And then we have the tag that floats at the surface. And the tag contains a GPS unit, a satellite transmitter, and a VHF transmitter. The VHF transmitter is what allows us to track these animals out in the field, and then the GPS unit and satellite transmitter allow us to see these animals from the computer at home. I do want to point out the different scars on Chessie. So the way that we can identify manatees is through their scar patterns. Each one has a unique one. And the orange markings is just a grease marker so that we can scar sketch them later on. And that orange does come off later on. And so a lot of people want to know, where's Chessie now? Well, the answer is we don't really know. He lost his gear in 2022 and we have not seen him since. But we are believing that he is still in Florida due to his movement not moving outside of Florida the last time he was tagged. So he's likely somewhere here in Florida, and hopefully we'll see him soon through photo ID or positive ID. So Chessie was a really good example of a research project that we are doing at CMARI. Currently, we're going through the North Atlantic Coast Manatee Tagging Study. Our main question is asking how and where do manatees disperse to during migrations in warmer and colder months? And our main objectives with this study is to document movement of manatees outside of Florida. We know a lot about how they use land or waters in Florida, but we don't know a whole lot outside of Florida. We also just want to see how they use habitats, how they use transient periods, identify migration corridors, assess environmental migration triggers. So why are they moving the way that they do? Is it cold water? Is it another reason? And then enhance out-of-state photo ID. And then just in general, just increase manatee awareness to those who may not know much about them. So we saw with Chessie that we will take advantage of the fact that a manatee is being rescued and released, and we're easily able to tag them. So far, we've tagged 39 animals. 5 of them were in Georgia, 17 up in South Carolina, and then 17 here in Florida. When we don't have releases, we don't have releases all the time, so we will set up different events in which we do wild catchings of the manatees. We have usually one each year in these different locations. We have one in Cumberland Island down in South Georgia, and then one in Savannah, Georgia, or Hilton Head, South Carolina region. So far, since 2015, we've tagged 44 manatees. And then up in Savannah, we've more recently started going up there, and we've tagged 6 manatees up until last year. So a lot of people want to know, how do we do this? Well, the main way that we're able to do this successfully is via airplane. You can see a lot more in the sky than you can from a boat or on land. It's probably a little difficult to see, but in that left picture, you can see a little trail of a manatee. That's a manatee that's leaving behind a footprint. And so the airplane is easily able to see where it's going and direct the boat to where they are. And so depending on the environment and the waters, we'll either do a land-based set or an open water set. Once we get these manatees ashore, we will do a full health workup. We have a team of vets on standby, and we'll collect different samples such as blood samples, skin, fecal, urine, nasal samples. We'll take morphometrics of the manatee. So this includes length and girth of their body. We'll do an ultrasound on their back fat. They don't have that thick blubber layer, but their back fat does give us an idea of their health of the individual. We'll also take heart rate and then respiratory readings with O2 and CO2. And then we'll do photo ID, we'll sex them, we'll see if they're male or female, and then we'll take the scar sketches. And then finally, we will also pit tag them, similar to how you would chip a dog or a pet. And we're able to identify the animals later on when they don't have a tag on anymore. So after these tagging events, our goal is to view these animals in the field twice a month, so about every other week. When we're out in the field, we'll record behavior. This can include traveling, are they mating, feeding, who are they with? We'll look at environmental variables such as temperature, salinity, and wind speed. Oftentimes, these tagged animals are with other animals, and so we are able to get good photo ID of the other animals, and so they're kind of rat out their friends. And so we can get a really good idea of the manatee population, not just of the tagged ones, but also of untagged ones through photos. And oftentimes when we're out in the field, a lot of people will ask what we're doing. People think we're fishing a lot, and we just kind of talk about what we're doing. And so we're really good at connecting with people that way as well. One of the more common questions that we get asked is, are these tags harmful for the animals? Well, the answer mostly is no, because we've seen that animals are able to act the same with a tag as without a tag. Also, our gear is made to break away if the manatee does get stuck on something like a dock, vegetation, or a boat. We have different weak points within the equipment so the manatee can free itself. For example, we can see on the top right, the belt, the tag, and the tether came off. On the bottom picture, just the tether and the tag came off. So depending what situation the manatee is, the gear will fall off. We can see that the tags do get beat up a little bit out in the fields. They can experience a lot of biofouling due to barnacles. Also, that picture in the middle is a penny, and that's the size of a gator bite. So gators sometimes will chew on the tags or try to chew on the tags. We see a lot of boat strikes. So some of the tags are missing pieces. That's due to boat strikes. And so oftentimes we're going out and just making sure that the tags are okay, the manatee's okay, because ultimately our goal is to making sure that we have the data, but that the manatee's well-being is most important. So from our tagging data and being out in the fields, we know that they eat anything submerged, floating, or hanging near or on the water's edge. We see that a lot of manatees have a preference for what they eat, just like humans have a preference for different cuisines, so do manatees. And in the wintertime, they can travel up to 14 miles a day just to feed. In terms of freshwater that they love creeks, rivers, spring upwellings, stormwater runoffs, as well as drain pipes. A really interesting story with one of my coworkers. Wish I was there to see this. But she was down in Miami tracking an animal, and with that antenna, beeps get louder as you get closer. And so the antenna was tracking her to the middle of a road. And she was really confused. She's like, this manatee is supposed to be in water. Why is it in the middle of the road? And it led her on top of a manhole cover. And it turns out that these manatees were going through a drain pipe. And they reached out to the city and they were able to remove the drain pipe. And as soon as they did that, the manatees got scared, and you can see them shooting out of the drain pipe one by one. And there was 14 of them in there. So manatees will go wherever they can. Sometimes it's a question of whether or not they can get out. Other places that manatees like to be is calm waters during storms and in areas where there's human influence that's very little. They tend to travel between places of food, water, and resting sites. Travel corridors offer areas for manatees to find each other. We've seen manatees sitting at the end of a canal before. A few manatees will pass, and then there's a certain manatee that comes up to them, and then the two manatees will go up together. So those are just some things that we've noticed out in the fields. They also, like I mentioned earlier, they refuge in certain areas for the winter time. They really need that warm water. So the springs, industrial outfall sites, canals, and mud holes. Some other observations that we've seen is that, as I mentioned earlier, manatees feed on different food sources. So sometimes we're asking, are they migrating to these different areas because the food is different from Florida to Georgia to South Carolina? Are they specifically moving because they want a specific food? So those are some questions that we have that we don't quite know the answers to. A lot of movements are associated with the tides. I've been out in the field, and as soon as the tide gets to the point on the shoreline where the vegetation is accessible from the manatee, they'll start eating immediately. And then when that water goes down and they can't access the food anymore, we'll see them start to either migrate or take a nap or socialize, although their behaviors can vary depending on the tide. We've also seen random southern migration movement in the summer. So that is unrelated to cold weather. We're not sure exactly why that occurs. When manatees do move to warm water right before winter, we start to see this happening. For example, right now we have a tag manatee with a calf that was up in Hilton Head. And she recently made the move down. Now she's past Jacksonville. So she was a smart mom. She decided to make the move early. We see most manatees move down south to Florida to those warmer waters when the ambient temperature drops to 19 to 21 degrees in November, December. And then we see that final wave of animals start to move when the temperature drops down to 17, 18 degrees Celsius. And we see them hightail it to the warmest area that they can find. When they're up north, this tends to be more artificial power plants that are giving off warm water. And after this third wave, this is when we start to see really bad cold stress animals as well as manatee deaths, and we see rescues happening. Last year I went up to North Carolina. There was an animal that was trapped behind a power plant. It turns out he was also had a boat strike recently, so there was some other things going on with him, but he was one example of a rescue that occurred in that winter season. In the wintertime, we see the animals tend to return to the same site every year, or at least a network of the same sites that are close by. After the winter season occurs, we start to see again that movement in the opposite direction, so back up north where it can be a little bit cooler waters because the ambient temperature is warmer. We see this in March to April, although this can be weather dependent and it really just depends on the manatee. Sometimes they will stay year round in Florida as well. and overall seasonal movement can exceed 300 or more miles. This is a chart showing the number of manatee crossings that occurred. And we can see the top is Georgia, South Carolina border, and the bottom is Florida, Georgia border. We see a lot more movement down from Florida to Georgia than we do Florida, Georgia than we do Georgia, South Carolina. The blue is representing movement north, and the orange is representing movement south. So we can see that movement south happening before winter and that movement north happening after winter, except that random kind of time in the middle of summer where a manatee decided to move south that wasn't triggered by a cold event. So this was a surprising movement that we observed. I just like this map because of the really fun colors, but this is showing 23 different animals and their movements, telemetry points based on our tracking data. Specifically, this is showing 121 offshore movements, and there's also 7 manatees that went into 16 different federal waters. So again, this is just an example of what our telemetry data can show. We also have, this is showing, this other one was showing Georgia, Florida borderline area. And this is also the same area in Cumberland area. This is showing 10 different manatees, and we can oversect these telemetry points with different waterways. We can get really interesting information about this. For example, the different waterways that they're traveling through and the different types of habitats that they're traveling through. We can also take this data and take density hotspots using statistical analyses. We can see where exactly they're spending the most time, whether that's in the Kings Bay area, Cumberland Island, Sapelo Sound, or the Altamaha River. And we don't quite know what the reasons are for these hotspots other than food preferences. If it's a male, perhaps it's following a female. We don't exactly know, but these are observations that we're able to make through the telemetry data. And so this year we were able to catch 5 manatees in Cumberland and 2 manatees in Hilton Head, South Carolina. And we hope to continue adding to our North Atlantic, admitting someone to the room, to the North Atlantic study that we're doing right now. So that's one example of study that we're doing at CMARI. Another study that we're doing right now is looking at winter sites. So where are these manatees going in the wintertime? And our main question with this is, what is the manatee usage in natural Florida springs, both spatially and temporally during winter months? So right now we're focusing on several different springs. We have Walaka Spring, Salt Spring, Silver Glen Spring, and then we have Silver River. Silver River is about a 3.5-mile spring-fed river, and that one is a little bit more south and a little bit more west. And this main river here, this is the St. Johns River, and this main body of water here is Lake George. And so these are smaller springs. The spring that's most popular here in Florida is Blue Spring State Park. So during the winter months, during early mornings, we'll go out during cold fronts and we will either kayak or boat these springs depending on where we are. We'll make sure to take really good photos of them from the left, from the right, the tails, so that we can get a complete view of their scar sketches. And this allows us to identify individual manatees that are coming to the springs. And we will also record the location of each individual that we see in this spring. So we'll be able to identify this and put it into a map in GIS. This graph is showing the number of manatees throughout the years during the winter seasons. We have the different springs that I just mentioned. We have Silver Glen, Salt Spring, Walaka, and Silver River. I mentioned earlier that we had a die-off of vegetation in Indian River Lagoon right before 2020. And then there was also a vegetation die-off in the St. Johns River earlier in the season in 2018. So we can see that here in the map. And this likely affected manatee usage of the springs in the wintertime. This is specifically Salt Spring. The head spring is on this left side here. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but it's over here on the left. So we have 2 different maps, one showing prior to the vegetation die-off and then the one after. There still isn't vegetation there to this day, but we can see that before the vegetation die-off, when there was vegetation and warm water in the same area, the density of manatees was more spread out. And now we're seeing the manatees just congregating more towards the spring head because there isn't any vegetation for them to spread out and eat with. So they'll have to go find food from another location. We can see here in this graph that the overall count of manatees has increased. It was especially high, not this past winter, but the winter before. upwards of almost 140 manatees. And then this one is Silver Glen, again, showing density before the die-off and after the die-off. And this one's a little bit opposite of Salt Spring, but we can see that that the density of manatees was more congregated in a specific area when the vegetation was there. Then afterwards, we see manatees more spread out as if they don't care where they are because there's no vegetation anyway, so they're gonna have to outsource food somewhere else. In Silver Glen, we saw the highest count of those 4 different springs of upwards of 160 manatees. And a lot of these were very new manatees for this past winter. And our goal is to continue comparing individuals by looking at the scar sketches across different springs and years. We also hope to monitor different springs besides these 4. And also we're involved in different habitat restoration. So we're seeing what we can do to bring the food and the vegetation back into the springs so manatees can winter there and feed there. And so again, those were just 2 examples of the research that we do. And then just to conclude, I know that manatees you're a lot less likely to see them up in Maryland, but if you do see them, just make sure to give them plenty of space so that you don't cause a change in their behavior. Signs that you're too close includes the manatee changing their behavior, as you can see in this photo. A safe distance to observe them includes 2 kayak lengths or 5 boat lengths away. And if a manatee avoids you, try not to follow it. And I've included a screenshot, or you're welcome to screenshot or take a picture of the hotline for Maryland, DNR, and FWC if you do see a manatee. But I hope that if you haven't seen one yet, you do one day because they're really cool creatures. I do want to just acknowledge all of our partners, and all this data was conducted under a permit from USGS. And thank you all for spending your Thursday evening with me. I'd be happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much, Julia. That was great. You can unshare. I'm going to put a spotlight on you, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. And let me find spotlight. There you go. All right. I wish we knew where Chessie was. We got to be on the lookout.
He could be up in Maryland. You never know.
Yeah. We put the Old Bay in the water, much like the Old Bay flavored water up here. So you answered Melanie's question that was in there. How do you keep the cord from getting the manatee entangled in something, which you don't? That does get entangled and it pops off. Are there any plans of having a different design of a tracker?
That's a really good question. So this tracking has been around, I think, since the 70s. So it's been around a long time. There's been other ways that they've tried to track. But with manatees, they don't have the smooth skin that dolphins have. So you can't tag like a suction cup on them. So that wouldn't work. And when they come up to breathe, sometimes they only bring up their nostrils, and you need the tag to not be in water in order for it to put data to our computers. So it wouldn't work with that. So we've tried different things, and the best outcome we have is what our design is now, but we are open to more ideas. We need more money than the budget to explore other options.
All right, everybody get your thinking caps on. We're trying to figure out how the best way to track a manatee. And you said that airplanes, are y'all using drones now also to look from the air?
That's actually funny because I'm about to take my drone license for aviation, the Part 107 exam. So we do that. We haven't with our organization, but I know FWC does. So that is something that's more up and coming in the manatee world.
All right. We have a question. How long does a manatee live? What is their life?
So their average lifespan is 50 to 60 years in the wilds. In captivity, they can live a little bit longer than this, though, upwards of 60, 70, I believe.
Where are they in captivity? Are they in aquariums or?
Yeah, there's some aquariums. Disney World has manatees. Some of them that are rehabbed and they can't go, or they can't be released back into the wild. They'll stay there until they die. SeaWorld, a couple other ones. Brevard Zoo, I think, just got some manatees. So. Yeah.
Okay.
Mike, thank you.
Yeah, Mike asked, how far out to sea are they traveling? I guess how far away from the coast might be it, because I said you said they go all the way up to Massachusetts, or they have gone that far.
Yeah, so they can take different pathways. They can take the open ocean, which we saw with the one that was recently tagged with the calf. She ended up taking the ocean side instead of the intercoastal. So it can be several miles offshore. There was one manatee that ended up going to the Bahamas. So they can travel pretty far.
Wow, and do they just travel solitarily, or they just are kind of, are they?
They do both. It's very individual. So, yeah.
And Lori wants to know, do you know the cause of the seagrass loss?
So the one in Indian River Lagoon, I believe, was due to a toxin that killed off all the vegetation. And then the one in St. John's River that occurred a couple years earlier, I believe was, at least in the springs, it was mostly due to, I forget which hurricane it was, but there's a really big hurricane that happened that killed off a lot of the vegetation. And we've also seen higher uptick of human disturbances. So it's probably a mix of both.
Do gators attack manatees? Do they have any natural predators?
So manatees do not have natural predators. Their predators are mostly us as humans and boat strikes. We've actually witnessed gators coming up to manatees, and they'll beeline for them and they'll just kind of go away from them. So they're really not that interested in them. They do like the tags. I don't know if it's something that's emitting like sound wise that the gators are interested in. So the tags have a lot of gator bites, but the manatees, they seem to live in harmony with each other.
All right. Do you rely on federal grants? And if so, have they been cut?
We do rely on federal grants. I am fortunate that I don't have to deal with a lot of that stuff. My boss, Monica, does. I think there have been some federal cuts. She's been really smart with our budget, making sure that we have a year out of funding. So we're not uptight. Like, for example, right now, I know a lot of other organizations have had federal grants cut. So we do have to look and outsource other areas for money, but we do have someone that writes grants for us, and she's really great at getting us funding. So grateful for her.
Preston wants to know, do you see snakes when you go watch them?
That's a good question. I haven't seen a whole lot. I can see your snake in the video. I haven't seen any though. I'm trying to think. I have not seen snakes actually. A lot of gators. I've seen monkeys. We see horses. We see a lot of things, but I haven't seen a snake yet.
Did you say monkeys?
Yeah, in Silver River, there's monkeys that enjoy living in the trees, and if you bother them too much, they'll start to bother you, but haven't had any bad interactions with them.
Remember, you can put a question in the chat box, or you can raise your hand and ask directly. I'll call on you if you want to ask Julia a question. I have a question because it seems like in the winter when they come and migrate and congregate down in those pools, it's such a different situation. You said that you watch them socialize. Are there any differences in the socialization structures during the winter versus the summer, when they're in those larger, groups in a confined area?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the thing that I've noticed most different is that they're all kind of piled on top of each other. So it's more of a shoving for space. We do see if there is a disturbance, we see all hundreds of manatees get disturbed at the same time, and they'll all kind of swim away from whatever was disturbing them. But I would say just mostly is fight for space a little bit. But mostly they'd have the same behaviors. Perhaps more stagnant in the wintertime. They don't have as much like movement. Other than that, pretty much.
Are they still eating? Do they eat the same amount in the winter? Is there a change in diet or activity level?
They'll still eat the same amount to sustain their behaviors, but they might have to outsource different foods because they'll have to have that warm water. So they're kind of more confined to what they can have compared to the summertime. And manatees are on a 24-hour cycle. They do the same things when it's dark as they do when it's light out.
Say that again. You mean they are up all night long?
They're on 24-hour cycles, so they don't sleep like we do at night. They'll keep doing what they normally do.
But when I was doing my icebreaker question and found that they were related to elephants, they also have the molars that work and move from the back to the front and fall out of their mouths, similar to elephants and such. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
How long can they stay underwater?
So that depends. Typically, when they travel, they will come up for air 2 to 3 minutes. When they're considered resting, they stay under for 7 to 8 minutes. And when they come up, they'll take a double breath to get that extra oxygen. In the wintertime last year, we saw a manatee hold its breath for 34 minutes. And for us, that's been a record of manatees. It was almost hypothermic because it was so cold. But it held its breath for a long time. And my coworker that was swimming, trying to do a tag exchange, was really was freezing. So we were timing it and we knew exactly when it came up because his tag would come up at the same time. So we verified that it was about 34 minutes so they can hold their breath, but that's pretty rare. Usually 5 to 7 minutes is an average, depending on their activities.
How do manatees, Rachel wants to know, how do manatees navigate, especially in the dark?
That's a really good question. So this is not entirely known to my knowledge. Manatees have something called vertebrae. I think that's how you pronounce it, but it's mostly like whiskers on their face, and they're really good at sensing motions and direction. We don't think that they use the magnetic field, so that's something that we hope to get more information on in the future. That's a good question.
What if Barbara is interested in Puerto Rico? Do you do any work over there? Or are you going to add it?
We don't have any in Puerto Rico. That'd be interesting to look at. We do have another team that's down in Belize, and they have manatees down there, and they're smaller manatees, but still the Floridian manatee.
Katie asks, have you observed any other manatees from elsewhere visiting Florida manatees?
I think you mean like the other subspecies Antillean manatees. We haven't, no. Not to my knowledge. Although I wouldn't say it's impossible, so you never know.
Well, if you've tracked them going all the way to the Bahamas, you would think, you know, that you might get.
Now there might be an overlap down there, especially with temperatures changing and everything. Yeah, things might change in the future.
I was so happy when you started the presentation that the manatees are no longer endangered, but only threatened. Are there any reasons why they are doing so well, relatively?
That's a good question. So right now, I would say the vegetation has grown back in the Indian River Lagoon. You can't go to the boat ramp without getting vegetation stuck in your prop now. So there's just been a really strong amount of vegetation and still a strong amount of wintering sites for all these manatees. So they're able to thrive more. There's still a long way to go, but a lot better than when the vegetation was gone.
Let's see. What are the dangers you deal? What are some of the dangers you deal with monitoring manatees?
So probably the biggest one would be gators. When we are swimming in waters, we'll always have a spotter to make sure that we don't get chomped on by a gator.
Well, that's good. You do rock, paper, scissors of who's the spotter and who's the...
It's a good question. Sometimes, actually. Who wants to get cold today?
Right. What is the social? Eric asked, what's the social structure of the manatee groups?
That's a good question. It varies. It's usually if it's a mom and calf, it's usually just mom and calf. Mostly females are in a group, or sorry, mostly males are in a group with a female. A lot of females don't like it. They'll beach themselves sometimes. So they don't really have a particular structure, I would say. But we do see a variety of males and females in different age groups.
Barbara, follow-up is, are the manatees in Puerto Rico a different species?
To be honest, I don't know a whole lot about the Puerto Rico area. If I go back to the map really quick, let me see if. Sorry, hold on. I don't. If you leave me your email, I will get back to you on that because I'm not entirely sure and I don't want to give you an incorrect answer.
Fair enough. Rachel says, why do we have manatees but no dugongs? And maybe you can say what that is.
To be honest, I don't know a whole lot about dugongs other than their molars are different and their tail is more like a mermaid. I don't know a whole lot about them, so if you leave me your information, I'd be happy to get back to you on that. But I don't know.
All right, fair enough, because we don't have them here and you're not studying them and searching for them.
That's a good question.
That's how do they get the circular scars? And I don't know if it's confusing the marks that you put around the scars.
If you're talking about the orange scars, maybe the orange markings around the scars, that's just someone going around the scars. It can be propeller strikes. I'm not quite sure which circular scars. If you elaborate a little bit more, I might be able to answer though.
Preston, do you want they look at the scars and then they put the orange marks around them and then take a picture of that so that when they see the manatees again, they can compare them to those pictures to see if they're the right, if this which manatees they are. They know it's the manatees by their scars.
I saw on the video that you showed us, they looked like scars. They didn't really look orange.
Let's see here. On Chessie?
But on the, like, in the video that you showed us with them tagging it.
Let's see.
That measurement they're taking right there, that's usually right where the belt is.
So the circular ones you might have seen was the orange grease marker that we use. I don't think Chessie had circular scars, but some of them do.
How do the ones that actually do have the circular scars get them?
That's a good question. So we're not exactly sure. Manatees can run into a whole lot of issues, but they do. Wait, sorry, I'm just looking at the video here. They can receive scars from things like otters. We've actually witnessed an otter chasing manatees out, so they can get really unusual scars, and sometimes we don't know exactly what causes it.
Well, that's weird.
Yeah, and sometimes they can have holes in their tails too.
I never knew any of this about manatees. I know a lot about snakes, but not manatees. I don't know that much about them.
I'm glad you learned something. What type of snake do you have?
This is a ball python. Her name is Pizza because she tried to eat pizza in the middle of a reptile class.
I love that.
All right, so now we got a couple more questions. How do you keep manatee ID images? Is there a digital library? Who is who? How do you look them up?
So there used to be a library with USGS, and now it's being transferred over to FWC, but it's been several years of that process happening. So right now at CMARI, we're kind of keeping our own database, and once FWC gets updated with theirs, we'll start adding to theirs. But I don't think there's a public database. Some people will go out and do their own photo ID on an individual basis, but there isn't a public one available as far as I know. But we do keep a database just on our own, and hopefully there'll eventually be one with FWC.
Regina asks, do manatees mate for life?
I would say it's pretty much the opposite. A male manatee will get whatever female manatee he is in the area with. So no, they don't mate for life.
Well, speaking of the reproduction, I was quite surprised when you put the statistic up of the prenatal deaths. No, the perinatal, not prenatal, the perinatal deaths statistics. That seemed really high, and it seemed like it would be a weirdly high in terms of nature if you had to, go through all of that and you're losing more than 25% of population at birth.
Yeah, calf death rates are pretty high, and I don't quite know the whole natural reasons for that. There was one time, I'll just share a quick story. We were out in the field trying to retag one of our tag manatees back in a warm water site, and we ended up seeing a manatee that was floating high, and so we called in a rescue for it, and it turned out that she had a fetus that was pretty much a rotten fetus coming out of her, and so it's not like super common, but it is one of the more common issues with manatees and births. So calf deaths are unfortunately high, and I'm not sure exactly what we can do to resolve that, but we do see high death rates for them.
Yeah, that seems bizarre. How long is their gestation? Do you know?
It's about a year, so longer than humans. So they're pregnant for a while.
And do they just give birth to one pup, or just could they do two?
Usually twins have been seen before though. And sometimes mother calves will kind of adopt another manatee. So sometimes you see manatees nurse or little calves nursing. And if there's two, sometimes it's just one that is taking her milk because they want to. So usually single manatees though for calves.
You mentioned that you watch their socialization. What are some of the kind of things that manatees do to socialize? Like, what's a manatee party? What do they do?
So we consider socializing a simple interaction. Sometimes they'll just come up, surface together, touch noses, and then leave. They can also kind of munch on the other manatee's head. We've seen them kind of do circles together, so follow each other around. We consider that socializing. So it's a variety of different behaviors, but any type of interaction, we consider that a socialization.
Awesome. All right. Any other questions tonight for Julia about manatees? We do have somebody on here, and I don't know if they're still on here, who Cindy worked for Maryland DNR, was part of the rescue effort with the National Aquarium and U.S. Fish and Wildlife to collect Chessie in 1994, and was on the Coast Guard flight, flew him back to Florida. So Cindy, I don't know if you're on here, but if you want to say something about that experience.
Hi, yeah, this is Cindy. I work for Maryland DNR. I'm a wildlife veterinarian. And at that time, in 1994, there weren't any reports of live manatees. There may have been live, then dead manatee in the Potomac River back in the 70s, but it wasn't well documented, I don't think. But Chessie, it was a really group effort, and the National Aquarium, the Fish and Wildlife Service, folks from Florida, SeaWorld were there. So everybody put in a lot of hours looking for Chessie and trying to capture him. He was captured on October the 1st in 1994, and the water temperature was 68. So right at that level of being too cold for them to survive.
It took a while to end up catching him, right? I think I read that.
It did. So he was seen throughout the late summer, I guess, and into the fall. The first sighting, if you can believe this, was in the Susquehanna River. We had a report of a manatee in the Susquehanna River, and I said, you know, that we don't have manatees. This was in 1994, and we certainly don't have them in Susquehanna. And as it turns out, 2 weeks later, we had sightings of manatees over on the eastern shore in the Elk River and the Sassafras Rivers. And it was shortly after that we had sightings down in Queenstown, which is where Chessie was eventually caught.
Wow, Cindy, that is amazing. I had no idea that they were up, up in the Susquehanna. That's crazy.
Well, at least the one, you know, we feel pretty sure that that was the case, because within 2 weeks there were sightings in the Elk and the Sassafras. So, you know, and the people that called it in, and they were certain that it was a manatee. And of course, back then we didn't have digital photography, so there wasn't a really good way to document it.
Thank you, Cindy, for giving us that insight.
One last thing, I guess we have had with Maryland DNR. I worked there and started our stranding program back in the 90s. We have had 3 dead manatees that we know of in the Chesapeake region, and 2 of them were in the same time frame in October, November, and one was found actually in April. It was a carcass found by the folks at the Calvert Marine Museum, and they called us, and we together kind of documented the fact that it was a manatee. It had been probably in the river down not far from Calvert Cliffs, I guess. for some time, probably since the previous fall. We had photo documentation of the scar patterns on that manatee, which it was really, really decomposed, and a manatee that was seen in that region and in Virginia with the same scar pattern. So we're pretty sure that it was the same one. And we have given all that information to the USGS, Kathy Beck, who was in charge of that database for a long time until she retired. So manatees do come up. We had a manatee reported in Connecticut maybe 10 years ago, I guess. It was a pregnant manatee, and the Mystic Aquarium took it in and then flew it back to Florida. So it's not unheard of that it happens. And we have sightings in the Chesapeake periodically. I don't know about every summer, but we certainly have them more frequently than you would think. Thanks for your presentation.
Thank you. Quick question. Did you guys perform necropsies on them when the manatees die, or do you have the means to do that up in Maryland?
Yes, and
Oh.
I'm a wildlife veterinarian, like I said, so I was part of the team that did the necropsies. We took them to the Smithsonian because they have a really good heavy-duty table to use for the necropsies. So we got a really good
Oh, gotcha.
couple of necropsies on the two that were in decent shape, I guess, that looked like they had died fairly recently, and both of them were cold stunning. We sent our tissues up to the National Wildlife Health Center, and they were both determined to be cold stunned.
Hmm.
And do you have your email address that you
Yeah, I'm gonna
put?
put it in the chat. That
That'd
way,
be great.
the answers that I didn't, or the questions that I wasn't able to answer, you're welcome to email me and
Thank you.
I'll get an answer for you.
Thank you. Let's see. Oh, Rachel wants to know, well, you sort of mentioned that they don't have natural predators because she asked about sharks.
Mhm.
Are there a
So
problem with?
manatees, not that we know of, possibly, but manatees will live, like they kind of live in harmony with gators. They'll live with sharks. We've seen manatees. We tried to retag manatees in a shark nursery, and I was like, I'm not gonna get in the water here. So manatees will live in the same space as sharks. And there are fossil records of manatees here in Florida. I don't know too much about that, but I know that they've been here for quite a long time.
Now, when Cindy mentioned sightings in Maryland are rare, but they're not uncommon. Do you think with climate change, their migration patterns will change as well?
That's a really good question. When I think of climate change, I think of more of the extremes and more frequent weather patterns happening. So I could see that we could get a change in their behaviors. Waters might get warmer or colder. Colder waters will occur for a longer period of time. So we might see manatees utilizing those warm water sites down here in Florida for long periods of time. But climate change is so dynamic, not sure exactly how it will affect them, but we can hypothesize that their movements will change a lot.
Jackie wants to know if they're going to Florida, exactly when and where am I guaranteed to see a manatee from the shore?
I would say the winter time. So when the weather's cold outside, any of the spring, so most of the spring state parks, you'll see manatees. You're not allowed to swim with them, at least in like Blue Spring, because it's a protected area. I would say Crystal River is a really big one. You're almost guaranteed to see a manatee from shore. You don't have to get in a boat or anything. So Crystal River or a state park, spring in wintertime.
Now, I was a little bit surprised that in your presentation you didn't mention a threat as habitat loss, and which is great. I mean, it seems like a lot of other presentations that we have, animals are facing the loss of habitat. Are all the areas where the springs and the streams leading into them, are they all protected, or are there developmental pressures?
That's a really good question. So a lot of the areas are protected. Some of them aren't, like when they're not state parks, they're not necessarily protected. Some of the springs are in people's backyards. There's just random springs that are underground and the manatees will kind of congregate to them. So it's a mix.
Now that would be cool to have a house with a manatee spring in your backyard.
Yeah, there are some, and some of them have video cameras, so and I wonder if they watch the live stream of their manatees in their backyard.
Very cool. So to get to the different springs, are they traveling through caves and things like that to get to the springs, or is it just a straight shot?
They do whatever they want to do. It usually depends how far north they are when that cold front hits. They'll tend to move directly to warm water sites if they're moving a little bit later, and sometimes they'll take their time if they're moving a little bit earlier. But again, this is very individual, so it just depends on the manatee. I don't think we've quite seen a pattern with that yet.
It seems like every manatee is lives their own special manatee life, how they want to live it, how they want to.
Very much so.
Very independent.
And they all have different personalities, so it's fun.
And what has been your most amazing manatee encounter or experience that you've had during your work with them?
Oh, that's a sweet question. I would say in Blue Springs State Park, with our special permit, we're allowed to swim to do our scientific stuff with them. And so it'll just be me and a shoreline of people watching me swim with them. And they're like, oh, she's so lucky. So just being surrounded by hundreds of manatees in crystal clear water is pretty amazing.
Yes, that sounds amazing. We're all we're all jealous of that as well. So you're very lucky. And we're lucky that you were able to spend some time with us tonight.
Thank you.
Share your knowledge, your research. Y'all are doing wonderful work down there. Maybe we can come down and visit and look for manatees with you.
Please do send me an email. I'll take you out in the field.
That would be great. That would be great. We will take you up on that. And everybody, thanks for joining us for Must Learn Thursday. Remember, next week it is mosquitoes, and they're more than monsters. That's the name of the talk. Mosquitoes, more than monsters. And also, don't forget your Panda Express order. Get it in. Put it in for October 27th, anywhere in the whole entire United States. Put the code in. Here is the link one more time. Just click on the link and place your order to support the Natural History Society of Maryland. So thank you all. Stay well, stay curious, stay outside. And thank you, Julia. We hope to see you in person sometime.
Yes, please. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.